Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required. Subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
Blog Talk Radio.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds.
Good evening, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio, and I'm your host, Jess Root. Thank you for listening tonight. And if you are listening to me after the fact via download or podcast, I welcome you as well. Thank you for taking the time to listen, to download the show. It's here, guys. It's here. We are 2 days away from the beginning of the Arizona Cardinals season. We know they are traveling to St. Louis. We know they are playing the St. Louis Rams. And you know what we don't know? Pretty much anything after that. We know what the personnel is going to look like. We know that there's a new head coach, there's a new talk, there's a new feel, but there's a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions heading into this season. The least of which is quarterback play, defensive play, offensive line play. What are we going to do? The scheduling. The Cardinals are in a very difficult, on paper at least, a very difficult division in the NFC West. I'm thinking baseball, National League West. That would be a completely different sport. But in the NFC West, we have a couple of expected to be powerhouses in the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers, mainly because why? Well, look at who's their quarterbacks. Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, who in less than a full season was pretty incredible. And Russell Wilson, who after a fairly shaky 5 first starts, put together one of the finest rookie seasons you'll ever see. And all he doesn't have is the height, but you know what? He is a once-in-a-lifetime prospect when it comes to quarterbacks. As much as it pains me to say, I am all in with Russell Wilson. I believe the kid is a star and that he will only get better. He's got the traits of what they want from every quarterback. He's tirelessly trying to get better. He wants things to be perfect. He's got the right attitude. He's all in with his team. You can tell the fact his team is behind him already. They see him as a leader on the team. He's only in his second year in the NFL. Well, I'm not going to talk anymore about the opponents for the moment because we actually have a guest on the line here in a little bit who will join us. 3K from Turf Show Times, our very own SB Nation St. Louis Rams blog, and 3K will come talk to us. He's waiting to give us some talk about the Rams and talking about the upcoming season. I have a feeling this is going to be a great interview. But let's get started talking about coming up with this Sunday. We know what the depth chart looks like. We know the roster. We filled out the practice squad. We haven't talked since after the preseason game, after the Chargers game, where things kind of fell apart on us. Now, what do we have? We have our starters on the field. We know who our starters are going to be. Darren College over the left side slides into where Jonathan Cooper was. We got Paul Fanaika, the former ASU Sun Devil. We have the roster set. The roster only has 4 wide receivers. Kerry Taylor, who initially looked like he was going to make the roster, even tweeted out that he would dream come true. Next day, oops, he got cut. He ended up on the practice squad. Still a great move. And So we know what the depth chart looks like, and there were some interesting things. There were a couple of waiver pickups in Bradley Souls, offensive tackle, was undrafted a season ago, ended up playing with the Indiana Colts after he was signed off the practice squad. And he actually had some significant time. He played a little bit of guard, a little bit of tackle, and then he was brought in as a fifth tackle on the team. And one of the curious things about the roster, how the makeup is, so they've got 6 cornerbacks. That's fairly normal. They've got 5 running backs. Well, that makes kind of sense when in previous season there's been 4 running backs and a fullback. No fullback here, so 5 running backs I guess makes sense. But the 2 positions that kind of interesting are the offensive line, 10, and receivers, 4. Interesting balance. I know that at least receiver, it sort of makes sense, especially when you have other players at other positions you want. We're not going to see all 4 of those receivers on the field all at once frequently. We know that Bruce Arians likes to run 12 personnel. He likes to have the 2 tight ends in the game, which means you're only going to have 2 receivers out there. And once Rob Hausler's healthy, you're going to see a lot of 11 personnel. And if it looks like it's 4 wide, guess what? One of those 4 wide is going to be Rob Hausler. And so you're really only going to see the only 3 of those receivers. Jerome Brown isn't going to see significant time, I don't think. But still. And then you have the addition of Patrick Peterson to the offense. And there you go. It kind of makes sense. As for the offensive line situation, you now have 3 backup tackles. You have Nate Potter, you have Bobby Massey, and now Bradley Souls. Now, the team recently came out and said they're going to start working Nate Potter at guard in practice so that he can be a swing player for depth. That way, Earl Watford, their 4th-round draft pick this year, is not the only guard. And that's not necessarily true because the center, Mike Gibson, he also can play some guard, but it gives them a little bit more flexibility. It'll be interesting to see who is active and who is inactive because Bruce Arians has previously stated that they will only dress 8 linemen. He might have even said one time only dress 7, but probably 8, which means I would bet Earl Watford likely will be inactive, and probably Bobby Massey. I would guess if they intend on Nate Potter being the depth guy. And what it may actually end up being is that, if I had to guess at this time, Nate Potter will be the guy that's inactive for the first couple of games until he get his feet underneath him. At guard, he'll be inactive. Bradley Souls will be inactive. And then you're left with Watford, Gibson, and Massey. But that's interesting enough. If you look across the board on the offensive side of the ball, we have a little bit of injury issue right now. Rob Hausler had a high ankle sprain. Is one of the issues that came out of that San Diego Chargers game, and he's still not. He was ruled out today. In fact, he was ruled out for the game on Sunday, and perhaps a more pressing injury occurrence that happened was actually today at practices when defensive end Calais Campbell, yes, that Calais Campbell, he suffered some sort of quadriceps injury, and he's listed as questionable for the game. It will be interesting to see if he is good to go. But what are the biggest questions heading into this season for the Cardinals? I said there are lots and lots and lots of questions. First of all, we brought in Carson Palmer. Obviously, the quarterback situation is an upgrade. How much of an upgrade is Carson Palmer? How much does he have left in the tank? What about the offensive line? Gave up a gazillion sacks last year, and more so, St. Louis a season ago, that Thursday night game, they were 4-0, and they got beat down. They showed up to an alley fight without anything. They didn't know that the brass knuckles and the knives were coming out. They thought they were going to be in a clean boxing match, and Kevin Cobb pummeled to a pulp against the Rams. Then 17-3 loss, sacked 9 times, hit I don't know how many other times. It was painful to watch that entire game. It's when the doors fell, the wheels fell off, the doors fell off, and all you were left with was up on blocks. An old beater car left up on blocks after it looked like this economy car might be something more after a 4-0 start, especially after that win in Foxborough. So, next question is, what about the offensive line? Can the offensive line provide Carson Palmer with enough time to run the offense that Bruce Arians wants to do? Another question mark. What is the defense going to look like this year? Ray Horton's defense looked awfully good a season ago. Ray Horton's not around anymore. It's now Todd Bowles. And so there's a bit of pressure, although there still hasn't been a lot of talk about this, because if you haven't noticed in the offseason, the whole goal about this offseason of change was all about the offensive side of the ball. They could have had Ray Horton as their head coach. He doesn't have a track record of developing quarterbacks. He doesn't have a track record of having they don't know. He's still unproven on that side of the ball. And while he says it's been confirmed at some level that he could have had Mike Tice on his staff, that he could have had Norv Turner on his staff, that wasn't enough to sway the ownership or now general manager Steve Keim into what they wanted to do. Enter Bruce Arians, lifelong assistant. He's 60 years old, 60 and sexy, as he says. He got his feet wet with a head coaching job a season ago, even though technically it wasn't his head coaching job. He stepped in for Chuck Pagano when he was diagnosed with cancer, filled in admirably, caught some lightning in a bottle. They won some games. They were in a fairly lightweight division, and they rattled off 11 wins on the year. Went to the playoffs with a rookie quarterback and Andrew Luck. Oh yeah, that guy Andrew Luck, number 1 overall pick, which made it his prospect was good enough. His star was bright enough that the Indianapolis Colts said bye-bye to their Colts player, to the Peyton Manning, after he missed the previous season with his neck surgeries and neck injury. Now, sorry about that. I had a little itch in my throat, and I didn't want you to catch me coughing on the air, so I'll just tell you that I was coughing offline here. And Andrew Luck, the prospect of him coming out of college was enough that they decided, hey, we'll toss Peyton Manning to the side. Who cares if he's a Hall of Famer? Who cares about this? We caught lightning in a bottle once before with Peyton Manning, a number 1 overall pick. And hey, this guy's a Peyton Manning style. I'm not saying style. He's not like Peyton Manning, but he's a Peyton Manning potentially caliber quarterback, franchise guy that can lead your team for a decade or longer. So they dump Mr. Manning on his tush and just take Andrew Luck. Season later, after only 2 wins, they improved 11 in the playoffs, and now Bruce Arians got himself a head coaching job. Will Arians be able to maintain the confidence and the quote machine that he is in the face of adversity? He's talking a good game. He's talking about winning now. Players are talking about why not win the NFC West. Actually covering the Cardinals and writing about the Cardinals and working as media for the Cardinals. I've been a Cardinals fan since the early 90s, since Tim Rosenbaugh and Tom Tupa, Joe Bugle as head coach, or Gene Stalling back when Ron Wolfley was a player in the NFL and a special teams fiend and knocking people out, and before his wordplay and his verbiage and his palaver, listen to the palaver, as in David Stern, NBA reference, gets on the air, he gets fired up. You don't know what he's talking about. You don't know where he's going to go. He's now a broadcaster. I've been a fan forever. Been through some bad times like everyone else. In fact, hey, if you're a Cardinals fan, there's one thing you know, it's misery. and you still follow the team. And every single year, you know what happens to me? I get sucked in at the potential. I get sucked in. I do. I think, hey, if this can go right and this can go right, am I crazy? I don't think I am. I think it's going to fall somewhere in between. Our season preview, our season predictions for our staff are going to be published here tomorrow, Saturday, that is, as we're at Friday night. Again, you're listening to Revenge of the Birds Radio, your Arizona Cardinals radio show and podcast by Arizona Cardinals fans for Arizona Cardinals fans, insider and outsider perspectives. And it's Friday evening. We get a little bit hot there to the latter half of the year, only to fall a little short. That's how I see this year playing out. But anyhow, I've rambled on enough. So what I have in store for you, and I've got them waiting on the line. So let's go ahead and talk about the Rams. St. Louis Rams. Season ago, they swept the Arizona Cardinals. One was in beatdown fashion, and the other was with Ryan Lindley at the helm, and he threw 2 touchdowns to the Rams. He didn't throw for a touchdown pass for the Cardinals in the entire season. However, Janoris Jenkins was his favorite receiver. Yes, Ryan Lindley scored negative 14 points. That's correct. So they returned to the scene of the crime last season, St. Louis Rams. They've got Jeff Fisher, second-year coach. No, he's not a second-year coach. Second-year coaching the Rams. He's got the pedigree. He's got the resume after all those years with Tennessee. Sam Bradford has an offensive coordinator again. He has an offensive coordinator now. He's got Brian Schottenheimer. He's expected to do more. And I've got lots of questions. So who do we have on the line? We have 3K from Turf Show Times. So let's bring him on.
All right. Well, Cardinals fans, we have a special treat for you tonight. As from Turf Show Times, our SB Nation Rams blog, we have one of the writers and one of the managers there. We've got 3K from Turf Show Times, and he's joining us to talk a little bit about his St. Louis Rams and what we can expect from them this Sunday in the season opener. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Jess. Although I worry every time I get introduced as a special treat. That's a bar that's hard to meet, both in terms of being special and being treat-like.
Hey, we're still fairly young here on the radio waves. So any guest, Rams, tell about the off season. What went well? What didn't go so well? What is you most excited about for this season?
I guess so. I'll take those one by one. I guess just to give some backstory. I think what's interesting about the Rams is that everybody's relatively aware that the expectations, while they aren't as high, certainly other teams in the NFC West, you look at Seattle and San Francisco, or the power rankings that came out for SB Nation the other day had them 1-2. They're looking at things that in St. Louis we may not be looking at in terms of postseason runs. It portends so well for this team because you still got 2 more first-round picks next year that the Rams picked up through the Robert Griffin III trade. So I don't feel that there's necessarily a rush to succeed in terms of conventional NFL success this season, but I think there is a bit of a question mark about how Sam Bradford's going to play this year. He's been good, if not very good for a quarterback as young as he is, with as few weapons and as little chemistry as he's had year to year. He's had 2 different games. The only game the Rams weren't in last year was that Patriots game in London, but other than that, they were in the fight every single game they played last year, and that's a clear demarcation from previous years. In terms of what's gone wrong, I guess the biggest thing was probably Jolon Dunbar. He was finally a good piece at the second level of that defense to put next to James Laurinaitis, and he originally hit with a suspension for performance-enhancing drugs. The Rams actually cut him this week, so I think if you're looking for something that's gone wrong, there's not a ton there. They're an incredibly young team. They don't have a lot of, like I mentioned, not only expectations in terms of win-loss and season success, but individual success. They're trying to carve that out almost player by player. But certainly Jolon Dunbar probably marks the sole dark spot in terms of the offseason. And I'm sorry, but what was the third part? You said what went right, what went wrong, and what are we expecting? Was that it?
What are you most excited about for season that's coming up?
What am I most? I mean, it's easy, and I'm sure you know Cardinals fans have seen it too. It's Tavon Austin. I live in the D.C. area, so I know some people who saw him in high school. Yeah, so
when you think about it, New England thinks that Danny Amendola is Wes Welker. That's why they let Wes Welker go.
Yeah, Finkel is Einhorn. They've kind of merged to become the same person. But we had Danny Amendola, so we've seen quickness, and obviously we've had guys that we slotted in a punt returner. We took Dante Hall after his peak, so we've seen guys that were quick. But I think seeing this level of quickness and this level of speed, he's one of those players that's so quick and fast. Defenders are used to taking angles to make a tackle. That
Tavon Austin is. Tyrann Mathieu was asked about him the other day after practice, and the comment he made. Now, it doesn't downplay his speed, but he said that Austin is quicker than he is fast. And now, correct me if I'm wrong. This is what he said. He said he does most of his work within the first 10 yards, not so much going deep, making plays that way, but doing his damage in the 10-yard range and then making big plays after that. And that the way you kind of combat him is kind of his plan, because we're going to see a lot of Mathieu on Austin. Mathieu is the Cardinals' primary nickel corner, so when there's a third receiver, he's going to come into the slot, and I know Austin plays. How much does Austin play in the slot? Does he play outside at all, or does he line up pretty much inside?
Well, that's the thing, is in the preseason they haven't really used him all that differently. He's done a little bit of slot work, he's done some outside, but if you watch Tavon Austin in college, he was a natural running back out of high school, and down the stretch for West Virginia this last year, they ran him more than they used him at wide receiver. Certainly, if you go back and watch that West Virginia-Oklahoma game, he destroyed them on the ground as a running back. He's got good vision, and he's got good feel for space. I think there's a question about how St. Louis wants to use him early on in his rookie season versus how they want to work him into their offense. I don't know that we know the answer to that, because and Fisher was public about this, that they were essentially concealing what they wanted to do with him in terms of their offense. But you go back, and I mean, it's funny you mentioned Tyrann Mathieu. I think for the most part he's right. I guess you would say he's got elite quickness and very good to elite top speed. I think that what's dangerous about him is that he's got both. I mentioned guys with quickness. We saw Danny Amendola. Danny Amendola doesn't have top speed. We've got Darrell Richardson as our starting running back. Very, very good quickness, very good acceleration, not great top speed, no jukes, anything like that. Tavon Austin kind of combines all that. Elite acceleration, very good to elite top speed, and then he's got some athleticism, some agility to break some tackles and elude guys, and that's rare that you see that combination of those kind of traits. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Matthew's right. You give him the ball in space, kind of tight to the line, and allow him to work his way through a defense. But that's not something that most NFL offenses are built to do for anybody. But you got the rise of guys like Percy Harvin and Dexter McCluster, Randall Cobb in Green Bay. There's going to be more and more of those guys coming out. DeAnthony Thomas at Oregon. There's a ton of guys in college I can mention. I'm a big draft guy. I don't want to waste time on that. But the reality is those offenses need some more experience. They've done that for the preseason this year in limited snaps as a starter. So they've got a deep threat in Givens. They've got possession guys. Hopefully, the Rams are hopeful that Brian Quick really develops into a more consistent threat in terms of the possession game. He's still a little bit behind Austin Pettis, but the hope is that he'll get there. So the rest of the offense really consists, in terms of the skill players at wide receiver, and tight end, you can throw them in, because with Lance Kendricks and Jared Cook, those are decent threats. Cook could end up being a very good threat. But no, they haven't really used Austin deep. They've got Stedman Bailey on the roster too, who was his partner at West Virginia and worked a little bit deeper than Tavon did. I think it's more a matter of using him on slants and hitches, screens, things like that, to keep him tight to the line, put some blockers in front of him, and let him weave his way through the field.
We're talking to 3K from Turf Show Times. He's given us some great information about the Rams, who the Arizona Cardinals will be playing this Sunday. Again, you're listening to Revenge of the Birds Radio. And we've been talking about Tavon Austin, the offseason. How much of one of my writers, Seth Cox, did a great piece with some film, with some screenshots based on what the Rams have been doing in the preseason offensively. And actually the guy that seemed the player that look like is going to give the Cardinals more fits. It's not going to be Givens necessarily. It's not going to necessarily be Austin. They definitely are their own threats. But tight end Jared Cook is the guy that the Cardinals are going to have fits with. And mainly because we don't have Darrell Washington for the first 4 weeks of the year. Yes, Carlos Dansby can do some cover, but he has lost a little bit. Jasper Brinkley has not been great in coverage. How much are they going to count on Jared Cook this year?
Well, I think early it's going to be pretty heavily. Lance Kendricks has been sidelined with an injury. I know you guys have seen plenty of him over his first couple of years with the Rams. Cook he's a bit of an interesting case. He's not a good blocker. Tennessee actually lined him out wide receiver more than they did at tight end. He's big. He's got great straight line speed, and it
looks like he's probably going to miss the game on Sunday. He's got a high ankle sprain. He's recovering from the third game in the preseason, and that's exactly the type of thing that we hope we get from him, because he's got that great straight line speed. He's a 4.4 guy in the 40. He's big. Well, he's tall. He's a matchup nightmare. And so what we get to see is, hey, that's a guy that actually knows how to do it, while Hauser hasn't quite done it yet. Obviously, last year the Rams were a very, very tough. And more something that was the defensive side of the ball on the Rams, was that just abject failure on the offensive line on our side?
Well, if I'm being fair, it was both. But as a Rams fan, certainly the defensive line is more than capable. It really is the core of the team. The Rams actually went ahead and signed Eugene Sims, a backup defensive end, to an extension, and they've got the entire defensive line locked up through next year. And outside of Jamel Cujo, a backup defensive tackle, they've got everybody else for 2015. Tons of talent. Hausler in high school. My wife's from El Paso, and I went out and saw a Judson game that he was playing at. I don't even remember him playing in it, but I think that's one of those weird things about Texas high school football is you end up going to a game and, oh, look at that, one of the guys that was actually playing in that game made the NFL, and I don't even remember. I do remember him more at his college ranks. I went to North Texas, so I saw a bunch of Sun Belt football, and obviously at Florida Atlantic I saw more of him than I'd care to remember. He can play. In terms of that defensive line, though,